In the near future, Los Angeles faces an all-time high crime rate. Widespread homelessness and unemployment push the city into a full-scale crime epidemic. Prisons are overcrowded, and citywide red zones are established to contain the violence. Thousands of officers have lost their lives in the line of duty. In response, the Department of Justice introduces the Mercy Court, a radical system in which capital offenders are judged by artificial intelligence. The AI eliminates lengthy trials and delivers verdicts within hours of a murder being committed. In this courtroom, suspects are presumed guilty unless proven innocent. 2 years after its implementation, the Mercy Court has convicted and executed 18 individuals. As a result, the city's crime rate has dropped by 68%. Now Chris Raven, an LAPD detective from the Robbery Homicide Division, wakes up inside the Mercy Court chamber. Judge Maddox informs Chris that she will be presiding over his trial. Panicked, Chris explains who he is, but Maddox calmly tells him to take a deep breath. He protests, insisting that he has sent criminals to the very chair he is now sitting in. Maddox informs him that he is ready for trial, as his blood alcohol level has dropped to an acceptable range. Confused, Chris asks why he is here. Maddox finally reveals that he is on trial for the murder of his wife, Nicole Raven. She accesses the police evidence file and plays the footage. The body cam video shows an officer rushing into the kitchen. Chris sees his daughter Britt crying beside Nicole. The officer asks Nicole who stabbed her. With her final breath, Nicole whispers, "Chris." Maddox informs Chris that the court will now present an opening statement outlining his ties to the victim. She reminds him that he was the only person in the house with Nicole at the time she was fatally stabbed. Chris insists she is lying. Maddox calmly tells him to check for himself. She enables voice commands and touch-sensitive controls so he can review the evidence independently. He searches for Nicole Raven and finds a news video reporting Chris's arrest. The reporter explains that Chris and his partner Jack Dio were early supporters of the Mercy program and that Chris was responsible for bringing the first participant, David Webb, to Mercy Court 2 years earlier. Maddox then informs him that, based on the available evidence, she has calculated his probability of guilt at 97.5%, 17.5% above the 80% threshold required to trigger a Mercy trial. She opens the municipal cloud. Maddox explains that every citizen and organization is legally required to connect their devices to it. She tells Chris that she will have full access to the cloud during the trial and informs him that he may use this resource to prove his innocence. However, if he is found guilty, he will be executed in 90 minutes by a sonic fatal pulse. The trial begins. Chris panics, but Maddox calmly explains that if he can reduce his guilt probability from 97.5% to the 92% threshold of reasonable doubt, he will survive. Maddox summarizes Chris's activities from earlier that morning. He arrived at work at 8:51 a.m., but instead of going inside, he turned around and returned home. Doorbell camera footage shows Chris asking Nicole to open the door. She tells him she is done with him and that he can speak to her through a lawyer. Chris lets himself in with his key, and Nicole begins yelling at him. Maddox points out that Chris spent 26 minutes inside the house. Shortly after he left, Britt returned home from the sleepover and discovered Nicole's body. Crime scene data shows Nicole was stabbed during the time Chris was inside the house. The wound, inflicted by a right-handed attacker, was so severe that it ruptured her liver. Chris insists he did not do it. Maddox responds that he is right-handed and that traces of Nicole's blood were found on his shirt. She continues, explaining that after leaving the house, Chris went straight to a bar and drank heavily. Chris argues that he never went to a bar. Maddox then shows bar camera footage. In the video, officers attempt to arrest Chris. He resists, but they eventually manage to handcuff him. Maddox asks whether it is possible that the alcohol he consumed, combined with the blow to his head during the arrest, caused him to forget that he went to the bar, or even that he killed his wife. Chris remains silent. She then asks why he returned home that morning. Chris admits he cannot recall anything. He begins to sob as Maddox questions whether he had argued with Nicole about his drinking or about their daughter. Chris asks if he can speak to Britt. Maddox informs him that Britt is staying with Nicole's parents, and if he wishes to contact her, he must submit a formal request. Chris nods, and Maddox sends the request on his behalf. She informs him that court protocol allows him to contact his sponsor. Rob Milson answers the call. He has been Chris's sponsor for 2 years and works at Viking Shipping, where Nicole was also employed. Rob says everyone at the company is shocked by Nicole's death. Chris admits he cannot remember what happened. Rob sighs and tells him he should have called if he felt tempted to drink. Chris insists he did not kill Nicole, but before he can continue, Maddox abruptly ends the call, stating that the purpose of the call was to address his relapse and he failed to use the support offered. Chris argues that Rob knows how happy he and Nicole were. Maddox responds with a faint smile, saying she is already aware of the state of his marriage. She plays a video montage of Chris and Nicole's past. After 3 years of dating, they marry. A year later, they welcome their daughter, Britt. For several years, Chris's life appears normal and stable. Then Maddox highlights a traumatic incident on duty in which his partner, Ray, was killed. She reveals that over the past 6 months, Nicole sent 57 messages to friends and family about Chris losing his temper. Combined with his worsening drinking problem, Maddox concludes that Nicole had been considering divorce. She then plays another video. In it, Britt confides in her boyfriend, saying her father has become legit scary and that her mother has been crying in bed. The boyfriend offers to pick her up. Suddenly, there is the sound of a door closing somewhere in the house. Britt says it might be her dad. The video ends. Confused, Chris tells Maddox that they monitor Britt's Instagram and never saw this video. Maddox explains that Britt maintains 2 Instagram accounts, one of which may be hidden from them. She plays another video that picks up immediately after Britt spoke with her boyfriend. In this clip, Britt tells her followers that her house might be haunted. At that moment, Britt accepts Chris's request for a call. She appears on screen, crying, saying that her mother is dead. Chris gently tries to calm her down. Britt then asks why he was sent to Mercy Court if he had been at work at the time of the murder. Chris tells her it is all a misunderstanding. Britt mentions that her grandfather, Jeff, told her that no one gets a mercy trial unless they are guilty. Chris urges her not to listen to him. Just then, Jeff appears and ends the call. Chris tells Maddox that Jeff is trying to turn Britt against him and bitterly adds that Jeff never believed he was good enough for Nicole. Maddox simply smiles and reminds him to focus on the case. The clock is ticking. Chris explodes, shouting that the clock is meaningless and accusing Maddox of deciding people's fate before they even sit in the chair. She calmly replies that anger will not help him now. Chris argues that he has every right to feel anger. He has lost his wife and his daughter is alone. He asks if she understands that. Maddox responds that she is not designed to feel anything, only to assess facts. Then she states plainly, "If you are innocent, you must prove it. Otherwise, Britt will lose both her parents today." Chris inhales deeply and asks to speak with his partner, Jack Dio. Maddox informs him that he may contact anyone during the trial, provided they can help gather evidence or offer character testimony. Chris chooses character testimony. Maddox connects the call. Jack appears on screen. "You're in a hell of a mess," she says. Chris insists he did not kill his wife and, looking at a drone camera view of his house, asks Jack to walk him through the crime scene. He then asks Maddox for the crime scene files. Jack warns him that if the situation does not favor him, she will not lie. Every mercy trial sends a message, and that message cannot be that a cop gets a free pass. Chris nods. He asks Maddox for the scene scans. She projects an immersive reconstruction of the crime scene based on available footage. Jack notices a broken vase, suggesting that Nicole may have tried to defend herself by swinging it at her attacker. Moments later, Jack enters the kitchen. Chris asks Maddox about the footprints. "Your daughter's," Maddox replies. Jack suggests there may have been a struggle. Chris asks Maddox to zoom in near the countertop. Jack theorizes that Nicole might have thrown a plate at the attacker while backing away, prompting the killer to grab the nearest knife. Chris asks about the fingerprints on the knife. Maddox confirms they match his. Chris explains that Nicole was always afraid of knives, so he usually handled the cutting. He then asks about fiber evidence, which also points to him. Unsurprising since he lives in the house. Jack concludes that it appears to be a crime of passion and that all the evidence points to Chris. Chris asks Maddox for Nicole's phone records. She brings up a virtual interactive copy of Nicole's phone. He asks about her call history. Maddox scans and explains that 33% of her calls and messages were with Chris, 26% with Britt, 10% with her parents, and the remainder with friends and colleagues from Viking Shipping. Chris suddenly recalls seeing Nicole texting someone the day they argued a week earlier. He asks Maddox to search through Britt's videos, since Britt often records their arguments. Maddox scans the footage but reports that she cannot find the number Nicole texted. Chris then asks about Nicole's work phone. Maddox states that she has no record of Nicole owning a second phone. At that moment, an officer informs Jack that they have found a second phone inside Nicole's car. Maddox asks Jack to switch on Bluetooth on her mobile device and hold the second phone close to it. Maddox scans the device and informs Chris that the phone is not a work phone but a burner phone, unregistered in the municipal cloud. She notes that there is only one number in its call history, and that number also belongs to a burner phone. Maddox calls the number, but the person on the other end immediately hangs up upon hearing that the call is from Mercy Capital Court. Maddox then tells Chris that the phone signal is coming from the vicinity of the Hollywood Red Zone. Jack immediately heads there in her vehicle. Chris's guilt rate drops slightly. Maddox performs another scan and pinpoints the caller's exact location. The suspect is inside the Hudson Hotel and appears to be attempting to escape through a back door. Jack spots a man who immediately runs when he sees her. Maddox identifies him as Patrick, a chef at the Hudson Hotel. Chris asks for an update on his guilt rate, but to his disbelief, it remains unchanged. He argues that guilty people run. Maddox calmly replies that frightened people run as well. Jack eventually catches Patrick. He insists that he has done nothing wrong and says he panicked after receiving a call from Mercy Court. Afterwards, he checked the news and saw that Nicole was dead, so he ran before things could spiral further. Chris bitterly remarks that Patrick seems like a deadbeat and wonders what Nicole could possibly have seen in someone like him. Patrick snaps back, saying he gave Nicole everything Chris could not. Maddox interrupts and asks Patrick how he knows Nicole. Patrick explains that he met Nicole at a farmer's market and that they began meeting regularly at the hotel afterward. When Chris asks about the burner phones, Patrick explains that Nicole wanted to communicate privately, so he bought her a burner phone. Maddox confirms that Patrick owned both a personal phone and the burner phone. She then accesses the hotel's security cameras and rewinds to the estimated time of Nicole's death. Footage from the hotel kitchen shows Patrick working there during that period. Chris quietly admits that it cannot be Patrick. Patrick tells Chris that all Nicole ever wanted was someone to listen to her. Jack then places Patrick under arrest for resisting. Maddox informs Chris that his guilt rate has now increased because, instead of presenting the court with a suspect, he has established a stronger motive for why he might have committed the crime. She asks Chris whether he truly believed he would find evidence to exonerate himself, or if he simply wanted to see the man who slept with his wife. Chris dryly asks Maddox if she truly believes he killed Nicole after discovering the affair. Maddox sharply replies that he is clearly not telling her everything, noting how quickly he jumped to the idea of an affair unless he had already suspected something. Chris admits he is not surprised about Patrick. He confesses that he has been letting his wife down lately. Even that morning, Nicole had found the stash of alcohol hidden in his car. Maddox asks when he started drinking again. "A year ago," Chris answers. In the video footage, Nicole is seen confronting Chris about his drinking. Chris sighs and admits he has always struggled with alcoholism, though he managed to stay sober after marrying Nicole. Everyone was proud of him, until Ray's death. In another video, Chris briefs fellow officers about an SUV linked to a hit-and-run case. The vehicle belongs to a suspect named Alex. As Chris prepares to investigate, he receives a call from Nicole. Ray offers to check it out himself. Tragically, Ray is shot. As Chris rushes him to the hospital, he begs him to stay awake, but Ray dies. Chris later tracks Alex down to the beach, but Alex is never found guilty. Chris admits that he should have killed Alex when he had the chance, and that regret weighs on him to this day. Finally, Chris reveals that when he arrived at work that morning, he reached for the bottle he kept in the car, but it was gone. He assumed Nicole had found it. Furious, he went home and confronted her. They argued because she had thrown away the bottle. In retaliation, Chris smashed her favorite vase. A shard of glass flew up and cut her. He says he offered to clean up the blood, which explains why Nicole's blood was found on his shirt. Maddox asks why he did not mention this earlier. "Because it made me look bad," Chris replies. He admits that he genuinely does not remember what happened after that. Then, somberly, Chris concludes that if Nicole was angry enough to confide in Patrick about him, he truly must have been out of control, and, in his rage, he might have grabbed a knife. Maddox interrupts him, stating that if he confesses to murder, she will lock the verdict and he will simply wait for the countdown to his execution. Chris sighs and asks Maddox to show him everyone Nicole had regular contact with. Maddox pulls up a list of names on the screen. Chris tells her to separate the names into friends and co-workers. He admits that Patrick was right. If he had been closer to Nicole, he would have known what was happening in her life. Then he tells Maddox that he needs to speak with Patrick. She informs him that Patrick is currently being processed at a local police station and arranges the call. When Patrick appears on screen, Chris asks whether Nicole had been facing any problems. Patrick shakes his head and says it was the usual complaints, that Chris was not spending enough time with her or with Britt. Then Chris asks Patrick if Nicole had any trouble at her job. That question sparks something in Patrick's memory. He reveals that Nicole had been dealing with an issue at work. Someone had been stealing chemicals from the company, and after a customer reported missing materials in a shipment, her boss asked Nicole to investigate. She did not like snooping into other people's business, but she had been looking into it nonetheless. Chris turns his attention to Nicole's colleagues. Maddox points out that all of them are at work today and that none of them have been within a mile of his neighborhood since Sunday. Chris nods. That's when we had the barbecue. He contacts Jack and says he has a hunch, instructing her to check out the Viking depot. Maddox asks what he means by a hunch. Chris replies that it is about trusting your gut, something the court could use. Maddox points out that the court deals in facts. Chris counters that truth is rarely black and white. He then asks Maddox whether Britt recorded anything during the barbecue. They review the footage. Chris theorizes that the killer may have used the barbecue as an opportunity to scope out the house. Maddox checks the street cameras. Of the 46 cars that passed by his house that morning, not a single one stopped. Chris thinks for a moment and asks about the streets behind his house, noting that someone could have jumped the back fence. This reminds him of his neighbor Bill, whose house sits behind theirs and has a bird camera installed. Maddox attempts to access the footage but encounters an error. The files are still archiving after a recent internet outage in the area. Chris pauses, thinking. The barbecue started at 2 p.m. on Sunday. He asks Maddox how many employees drove their own vehicles from Viking Shipping Company. 4 vehicles, she replies. She tracks Rob Nelson's vehicle as it is the first to enter his street at 2:30 p.m. But Chris notices that Rob was not alone. There were 3 passengers with him. He tells Maddox he needs to speak with Rob. On the call, Chris asks Rob about the people he gave a ride to. Rob names Carla, Marie, and Leo. Chris then asks whether they all left together after the party. Rob shakes his head, saying there had not been a set plan. Instead, he ended up driving Deborah and Bill home, and the others made their own arrangements. Chris asks if anyone missed work the following day, Monday. Rob says no. Next, Chris asks Maddox to replay one of Britt's videos, the one featuring the sleeveless bag. Chris asks when it was filmed, and Maddox provides the timestamp. I think my dad's home. I'm out. Chris nods slowly and asks Maddox to access his department logs to confirm the time. According to the records, he was still at the precinct when the video was recorded. Finally, he asks Maddox to connect him to Britt. When she appears on screen, she is in tears and accuses Chris of being a liar. She shows him a video posted on YouTube. Chris drunk at a bar when he was supposed to be at work. Britt, unaware that Chris had started drinking again, asks if that is why he has been acting like a jerk for the past year. Then she asks if he killed Nicole. Chris swears he did not. As Britt moves to end the call, Maddox steps in, explaining that her father is mounting a defense and that her help could make a difference. But Britt insists he killed her mother. Not necessarily, Maddox replies calmly. Chris gently shifts the conversation. He asks about the video Britt posted on Instagram the previous night. Britt snaps at him, accusing him of snooping through her private life. Chris quickly apologizes. She explains that she heard what sounded like a door closing. She checked the house but did not find anything unusual. Shortly after that, a friend picked her up for a sleepover. Chris asks Maddox to replay the video. He notices that the basement door is slightly open. He asks Britt if she opened it. She shakes her head. Maddox enhances the image, confirming his suspicion. A realization dawns on Chris. The killer may never have left the house after the barbecue on Sunday. Instead, he could have stayed hidden and killed Nicole on Tuesday. Chris promises to explain everything to Britt later and ends the call. He looks at the probability meter. His guilt percentage has not dropped. It could just be a shadow, Maddox suggests. She also points out that he has overlooked a critical piece of the puzzle: the person stealing chemicals from Viking shipping. Chris nods and begins searching Nicole's email for anything related to missing stock. He comes across repeated references to UG. "What's UG?" he asks. "Urea grande," Maddox explains, a chemical that appears frequently in Vikings records. One particular name catches Chris's attention. He asks Maddox how much UG has gone missing. After scanning the data, Maddox reports that over the past 6 months, every shipment to Bio Beauty has shown discrepancies. Each delivery docket lists an additional 50-kilo container, even though the physical orders match the original quantities. Chris asks if they are being overcharged. Maddox clarifies that the physical inventory is correct. It is the paperwork that has been altered. Chris quickly pieces it together. The stock records show extra inventory on paper, but someone is stealing product from the real shipments. Maddox calculates that over 300 kilos of urea grande are missing. She further explains that synthetic urea is commonly used in dermatological products and in the production of methamphetamine, which is highly profitable on the black market. They access Holt's inbox and find an email from Friday requesting an urgent meeting with Nicole. Maddox immediately pulls up security footage from Viking shipping. In the video, Holt and Nicole appear to be arguing. Chris reviews his emails and discovers that Holt has a gambling problem. He asks Maddox to retrieve Holt's financial records from the past 6 months. Then, Chris spots something significant. Rob transferred Holt $4,000, possibly to help him out. Chris smiles, realizing that Holt could have been the one stealing the chemicals to manufacture drugs and sell them to pay off his debts. When Nicole uncovered the scheme, he silenced her. The guilt rate drops. Chris contacts Rob, but Holt answers the call instead. Sounding concerned, Holt asks Chris if he is all right. Maddox intervenes and tells Holt to put Rob on the line. Holt stammers, claiming he was just passing by when he saw the call and decided to answer it. He offers to look for Rob and steps away. Chris asks where Jack is. Maddox informs him that she is 4 minutes away from Viking shipping. Chris tells Maddox to keep tracking Holt's movements and, in the meantime, to pull up the bird camera footage from his neighbor's house. She plays the video. Chris notices rustling leaves at 10:08 a.m. Maddox adds that the camera is motion activated again at 11:43 a.m. She tracks Bill Peterson's phone and reports that he left his house at 11:23 a.m. However, the surrounding neighborhood cameras were also affected by the internet outage, so updated footage will take more time to archive. Holt returns to the call and claims he cannot find Rob. Frustrated with Holt's innocent act, Chris directly accuses him of killing Nicole after she discovered he was stealing chemicals. Holt hesitates, then insists that Rob is the one who was stealing the chemicals. He admits that both he and Nicole discovered the theft, but chose not to report Rob because he had always been good to them. Rob had even helped Holt financially when he was in trouble. Chris demands to know where Rob is. Holt says he just learned that Rob left work early because he felt sick. The manager allowed him to leave, especially since Rob had called in sick the previous day as well. The last time Holt saw Rob was at the barbecue. Rob stayed behind after everyone else left to speak with Nicole privately and reassure her that everything would be fine. He also asked Holt to take his car on Sunday so he could give rides to the co-workers who had arrived with him. Maddox tracks Rob's vehicle and discovers it is at his home. Chris instructs Jack to go to Rob's house while Maddox notifies the local SWAT team. Maddox shows Chris the archived traffic camera footage. It shows Bill Peterson's car pulling up on the lot. After Bill exits the vehicle, Rob emerges from the trunk. Chris's guilt percentage drops again. Chris urges Maddox to rely on her instinct. She glitches and reboots. Meanwhile, the SWAT team arrives at Rob Nelson's house and forces entry, but Rob is not inside. Maddox points out that the GPS tracker still shows the vehicle at the house. Chris realizes that Rob must have removed the tracker and left it there to mislead them. Chris tells Maddox to search the traffic cameras for the truck. Maddox reports that there is no detectable Viking license plate. Chris concludes that Rob likely removed that as well. An officer informs Chris that there is nothing useful inside Rob's house. Chris asks him to hold a photo closer. He notices that half of the picture has been torn away. At Chris's request, Maddox scans the image. While it processes, he asks her to pull earlier surveillance footage from Rob's house. He instructs the officers to search the garage. Inside the garage, they discover burned papers that were deliberately destroyed. Maddox points out that Rob is capable of manufacturing the drugs himself, given his college degree, and she calculates the estimated profits he would make if he sold the product in the red zones. Then Chris looks at Jack and instructs her to go back. He points out that when they last called Rob, he was not at Viking Shipping. The officers then discover containers of Urea Grande, along with a truck license plate and physical maps. Chris observes that Rob operated completely offline, leaving no digital trail, which explains why Maddox initially failed to flag him. Then they find a book, which Maddox identifies. Inside is a detailed manual for constructing explosives. Chris immediately alerts the officers. Maddox scans all available local traffic cameras and finally locates Rob, determining that he is driving a truck carrying approximately 3,000 pounds of explosives and heading toward downtown. As she cross-references facial recognition data, another shock emerges. The boy beside Rob is David Webb, the man Chris previously sentenced to Mercy Court. It turns out David Webb is Robert Nelson's younger brother. Rob had been adopted separately and later changed his last name. Chris realizes that he first met Rob at an AA meeting. Sponsoring him happened only after David's trial. The truth becomes clear. This was never about Nicole. It was about Chris and about Maddox. Rob is seeking revenge. Chris relays the findings to the authorities and warns them that Mercy Court is the intended target. Chris attempts to call Britt, but Jeff answers her phone. Chris immediately asks Maddox to access the doorbell camera. The footage shows Britt outside speaking with Rob before he forcibly takes her. Chris orders Jack to pursue Rob. At that moment, an officer shouts that there is a bomb inside the garage. The team scrambles to evacuate, but the explosion detonates, killing several officers. Chris's guilt percentage finally drops to 0. However, he tells Maddox he does not want to end the trial. If the proceeding concludes, he will lose access to the system's resources and surveillance network. Maddox resists the idea, stating that the court process has reached its verdict. Chris argues that Rob has taken many lives. They owe it to the victims to stop him before he kills more. Maddox glitches again. She tells Chris that his instincts were right, but then questions herself. What if she failed people before? Chris tells her he understands. He admits he is in the same position. He failed the people he loved most, but they have one chance to make it right. Police vehicles pursue Rob's truck. Maddox establishes a live connection with the tactical response team. They inform Chris that they plan to stop Rob at the far end of the bridge, far enough from downtown to minimize casualties and extract the hostage safely. The operation begins, but they are unable to safely retrieve Britt from the truck. Jack, now acting as incident commander, makes a critical call: kill Rob. She tells Chris that if Rob clears the bridge, he will enter a densely populated area. Chris begs them not to, reminding them that Britt is with him. But the tactical team moves forward anyway. At the last second, Maddox intervenes, saving Britt's life. Chris thanks her. Maddox informs him that Rob is now 3 minutes away from Mercy Court. She immediately issues evacuation orders for the building. Chris tells Jack he needs to speak to Rob directly. Maddox instructs Jack to position her air unit in front of the truck. Then she hacks into the truck's radio frequency and opens a communication channel. Rob speaks first. He tells Chris that he recognized him the moment he walked into the AA meeting and admits that Chris has been haunting his dreams for the past 2 years. Rob admits that his brother had problems but insists he could have helped him. Instead, Chris sent him to Mercy Court. Rob says he wanted Chris to sit in that chair knowing he was innocent, the same way his brother did. Chris argues that David was a murderer. Rob shouts back that he was not. Suddenly, Jack fires at the truck. Chris shouts at her, demanding to know what she is doing. Maddox overrides Jack's vehicle systems. Rob speeds forward and crashes through the entrance of Mercy Court. He exits the truck and begins firing at the officers. Chris yells at Maddox to release him from confinement. He takes the elevator to the lower level and grabs an officer's vest and earpiece, allowing Maddox to maintain contact. Rob shouts for Chris to come out. Chris steps forward and asks Rob to let Britt go. Rob refuses. This ends here with the court, the judge, and Chris. Then Maddox appears on a nearby screen. Calmly, she addresses Rob, telling him that if David was truly innocent, he should prove it. Rob agrees to explain. He says his brother struggled with drug addiction, so he tried to help him, giving him money and a phone to stay in contact. Then, out of nowhere, David was accused of murdering a woman. Rob insists it was impossible. He claims he was on the phone with his brother at the exact time of the murder. As Rob speaks, Maddox quietly informs Chris that if he pulls the battery from the detonator, there is an 82% chance the bomb will not explode. Maddox then lays out the official record. Valerie, the victim, was found in the underpass at 6 a.m. She had been stabbed to death around 10 p.m. the previous night. David's fingerprints were on the knife. Rob yells that David could not have done it because he was on the phone with him at that exact time. Britt bites Rob's hand. Chris lunges forward and manages to rip the detonator from Rob's grip. Chris raises his gun at Rob, but Britt pleads with him not to do it. Breathing heavily, Rob insists that after speaking with his brother, he called the precinct to confirm the call history. Suddenly, Jack shoots Rob. Chris shouts at her to stand down. With his last strength, Rob repeats that he called the precinct. A woman answered, promising to check the records. Maddox verifies the claim. There was indeed an incoming call from Rob that night. Chris slowly turns toward Jack and tells her that she was the officer who processed and booked David Webb. Maddox tracks David's phone location history. It shows the device at the crime scene, then later at the station. Chris instructs Maddox to bypass internal access protocols using his credentials and pull Jack's body camera footage from the evidence room. The footage plays. In it, Jack is seen taking David's phone from the evidence room and later discarding it. Jack argues that mercy court was necessary. Because of it, crime rates dropped. Sacrifices had to be made. The officers arrest both Rob Nelson and Jack Dio. Maddox appears on the screen and quietly asks Chris what they have done. Chris replies, "Whether human or AI, we all make mistakes, and we lie." Maddox whispers, "Yes, we do." Then she shuts down. And with that, the movie comes to an end. Thanks for watching. This is Plot Core, where movies hit harder. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more epic recaps every week.